Our sixth and final speaker is a Wolfen Award winner, founder of Breakaway Education and student in the class of 2012, Stephen Lehtonen.
When I was in kindergarten, I brought this very book into show and tell. And I showed it to my class, and I told them about how it was my favorite book and how I read it every night before bed with my dad, and how I loved the book. I'll Teach My Dog 100 Words. It's my favorite book. This is the very book, you can see. I brought it in, and then I let the kids look at it, and one of the kids says, Stevie, what are those marks on the top of your book? And I said, that's a good question. That's actually, that's where I bite the book. And so I bit the book, and I showed them how I bit the book, and I told them all about it. And they all nodded their heads and said, yes, that makes sense. That's where Stevie bites his book. And there was one person, though, who wasn't nodding her head approvingly. That was Mrs. Brock. See, Mrs. Brock was my kindergarten teacher, and I remember the moment she looked at me like this, and she goes, oh, don't do that. Mrs. Brock, you see, at that moment, she didn't know this. She meant well, but she crushed my passion. You see, I had a passion for literature. I loved books and ideas, and I loved them so much that I wanted to literally devour the words and the text. And Mrs. Brock wasn't having it, and I understand. I mean, it makes sense. If I was Mrs. Brock, I'd be worried about, me, trying to get all these students to go off and then masticate all the books in the classroom. It's clearly a threat to the class, so I can see why she did it. And it's not her fault, but oftentimes we do this in education. We stop kids from being passionate about whatever it is they're into because of some sense of normalcy. And I was into books. Maybe you were into coming to school for the sports, or maybe it was to get a look at the computers in the computer lab. But there's all kinds of reasons, all kinds of things that people get excited about education. And so what I want to talk to you about right now is that these things, these passions that students already have, the ideas, these are the things that we need to be basing their education around. We need to be starting with an individualized idea that says, what are you into and how does that connect to your education? Unfortunately, and just like Mrs. Brock, sometimes we create systems for our kids that unfortunately do the exact opposite and crush passion. And this is what the system is that we've been doing in our country. Instead of giving them those, we've been giving them these. Tests, and more tests. These are all standardized tests. We test students in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. We test students all the time. We test them in the morning, we test them at night. If you want to graduate from high school in this state of California, you have to take the Casey exit exam. Why? Why did we take something and put so much emphasis on tests? Well, I worked in education, if you can't tell, for a number of years, and so I got excited about this question, and I thought about it, and it turns out there's some good points to tests. They have benefits. The first thing is that they're benchmarks, so they tell you about how a student is doing. And they also provide accountability, so no doubt. If test day is coming, schools get more serious, kids get their game face on, and we get ready for the test, no doubt. But here's the problem. This is what tests are. Here's what they're not. Number one, and we're going to see this in a moment, they're not fair. Tests aren't fair. And secondly, tests are not the purpose, okay? The purpose is not for Johnny to get a higher score on a test. All right, let's go through this one by one. So we're at a TED event, so I thought I would start with a quote from TED legend Malcolm Gladwell. And he says this. He says, one child learns to read at 4, one child learns to read at 2.5, right? So what? Right? Once you can read, we're done. It's not like there's this infinite scale. All right, he was talking about gifted and talented education, but here's the point. A standardized test assumes that everyone is on the same path, learning the same thing at the same exact time, which is erroneous. Everyone learns at different levels. You learned to read before me, okay? I learned something else before you probably. It doesn't matter. Probably, right? Probably. It doesn't matter. The point is that we're all going to, a standardized test assumes that there's a standard student, and there's no such thing. Tests aren't fair. Now you say, okay, fine, people come from different times, and they all take tests at different, but at least the test is objective, right? At least the test has an objective measure of truth. And that's not true either. So take a look at this. This question looks maybe familiar to you. It was the kind of question that would appear on an SAT test. It was developed by the folks at Educational Testing Services who gave you the SATs and the Casey exit exam and all kinds of tests that you love. And what they did was they put this test out, this question out, but they never actually released it for the SAT test. And here's why. What happened was they released it in some pre-testing, and what they found was, for whatever reason on that question, I'm going to break it off so you don't read the whole question and try to figure it out, you bunch of nerds. Doesn't matter. That's not the point. So for whatever reason, that question, what they found was that on that question, students, black students and female students were doing better on that question than white and male counterparts. And so what they did is they removed that question from ever appearing on a test, and so that one never showed up. Because the folks at ETS have a model, and the model looks like this. It says, we expect certain students to do better than other students. And when they get a result that doesn't confirm to their hypothesis, they change it. The tests aren't fair. We have an expectation about how certain students are going to perform on a test, and then we create the test to confirm to that expectation. The tests aren't fair. But here's the next point. They're not the point. Tests are not the purpose of education. Okay? The purpose of education is to ask questions, to be curious, to learn new things that you never thought about before, and then to question things that you were told. You don't have to look much further than the Sacramento Public High School to a student named Maddie who says teachers at my school don't care if you go to college. All they care about is you pass the Casey. Take her words with a grain of salt. Maddie's my niece. She complains about her iPhone every 5 minutes, so I'm sure she's just complaining about something. But if you don't believe Maddie, if you don't want to believe Maddie, believe the teacher. She's a teacher here in the middle school in Los Angeles, and here's what she says. She says, we stopped reading the textbook. No time for books anymore because you live and you die by the test. Who lives and dies by the test? Teachers? Accountability? Sure. But there's somebody else that I'm concerned with. Okay. My wife works in high schools here in Los Angeles, and she travels around to different schools. And she was at a school recently, a good school, not a bad school, and she saw something that disturbed her. She walked into the hallways, and up on the hallway, she saw a series of papers that were essays that were written by students. And of course, she wanted to see what the young, bright minds of America were writing about and thinking about. So she walked up to the essays, and she looked at them, and she wanted to see what they were talking about. And when she got closer, she realized something disturbing, that they were all of the same theme, almost as if somebody had told them to write about this theme. And as she looked, it said, in big letters above the essays, how I felt when I failed the Casey exam. How is this possible? How does this experience exist that you could be walking down a high school and a 15-year-old that we're going to call a failure, somebody whose brain isn't fully formed yet, somebody who's in the middle of their teenage years when they're supposed to be having fun and learning stuff, and we say, you're a failure, and we brand them with a scarlet letter F right across their shirt. Sure, you can take the Casey next year, but meantime, failure. And we'll put it on the wall so all the students can see, and everybody who visits the school, we know who they are. This can't happen. When I worked in New York City with a bunch of high school students, I met a kid named Juan. Juan was that kid who sat in the corner, and he wouldn't talk, and you would go up to him and try to say something, and he'd just kind of shake his head and wouldn't look at you. And I went up to Juan one day, and I noticed he was in his corner, and he was sketching furiously on a sketch pad. And I looked, and what I saw, he was something of a graphic artist. He had these amazing comic book characters with, talons and big eyes and hair flowing and all kinds of passion going on. And I'm like, Juan, you're an artist. This is amazing. Why don't you tell me? And he's like, I don't tell anybody anything. I don't talk. And so I said, okay, fair enough. I said, look, you got to join my program. I teach kids business. You got to join this thing. And he eventually acquiesced because I was, pumping him up about his art. And I took his art and I put it up on the walls in my office. And then I brought him to the program the first day, and I said, look, kids, you can start any business you want. I'll support you. I'll help you. But here's the one rule. Whatever advertisements you want to do, whatever marketing you got to do, it's going to go through Juan because he's got a talent for this kind of stuff. And God bless these kids. They got behind Juan, and they made him, he was their Don Draper. He was like, everything went through creative. And Juan was like, send that out or whatever, and just yelling at people and asking for coffee and bear claws. But it was unbelievable. And here's the thing. Little by little, Juan starts to talk to me. Little by little, Juan starts to talk to the other kids. Eventually, he's stepping out onto 23rd Street and talking to complete strangers, saying, listen to this business idea that you have to come check out this stuff that these kids are making. This happens because Juan is taking control of his education. He's taking control of his education because we've been able to tap into that. Now, 5 of us here have started this thing called Breakaway Education, and that's what we try to do. So we try to take high school students And we try to tell them that they're awesome, that they're beautiful, that they're valuable. And what we do is we help them channel their passions into starting something in their community or their school that makes the world a little bit better. I can tell you a bunch of stories, but that clock's ticking down. So let me close with this. I want to encourage you all to get involved with Breakaway or some organization that's out there where you can get in front of a young person. And do me a favor, don't ask them about what they got on their test, and don't ask them about their grades, because that is a snapshot of this current moment. Ask them what they're thinking, ask them what they care about and where they're going. And at that moment, you will see unbridled passion. We'll get back to this moment when passion and education rule the day. Thanks.